The day had been exhausting. She was trapped in a life of routines, a series of predictable events she had come to accept. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft, mechanical hum, and she was finally on her way down after yet another long day at work. She felt the weight of the day in her bones, the kind of tiredness that only mental fatigue could bring. As the doors closed, she glanced up, her eyes meeting the gaze of the man standing beside her. He was tall, sharply dressed in a suit that seemed to effortlessly highlight his physique. The kind of man who commanded attention without trying. His smile was warm, with just the right hint of charm, and his eyes, dark, intense, met hers with an almost knowing expression. A stranger. Yet there was something oddly familiar about him, like a magnetic pull she couldn't quite explain. He caught her staring and, instead of looking away, gave her a smile that made her heart skip a beat. Her stomach fluttered, and she quickly looked down, pretending to examine her phone. She was married after all. She wasn't supposed to feel this way about a stranger, not even in passing. But the feeling lingered, like a strange, electric charge in the air. Her thoughts started to drift. She remembered her husband, sitting at home earlier that morning, tired, distracted, hardly looking at her. Their connection had been fading for months now, maybe longer. She had tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself that everything was fine, that their quiet dinners and lackluster conversations were just phases. But deep down, she knew that something was missing, something fundamental. She felt lonely in a marriage that once felt so full of promise. Long day. The stranger's voice broke through her thoughts, calm and inviting. She looked up, startled, and found him watching her with those dark eyes, almost too closely. "Yeah," she replied, her voice betraying a hint of exhaustion. She quickly cleared her throat, pushing the unnecessary thoughts aside. "You?" "Same," he answered with a small nod. "The kind of day that just never ends. But I'm not complaining. I get to go home soon." She nodded, unsure of what else to say. The elevator continued its slow descent, and for a moment, the silence stretched out between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, though. Not really. It was the kind of silence that felt easy, almost like they had known each other for much longer than just a few seconds. The man shifted slightly, adjusting his briefcase. His presence, despite its calmness, was undeniable. She couldn't help but steal another glance, drawn to his sharp features and the way his suit fit him perfectly. He had the kind of effortless confidence that could make anyone feel like they weren't quite measuring up. She caught herself again, mentally scolding herself for feeling this way. "So, do you live around here?" His voice cut through her thoughts again, and this time, she was ready for it. He seemed genuinely interested in the conversation, which, to her surprise, didn't feel intrusive. "Yeah, just a few blocks away." "What about you?" she asked, her curiosity now piqued. "I'm in the area," he replied. His tone was relaxed, his body language leaning slightly toward her as if he wasn't just passing the time, but actually enjoying the moment. The proximity, the conversation, everything felt just a little too intimate for a random encounter in an elevator. It unsettled her, yet the feeling was strangely comforting. She felt her pulse quicken when their hands brushed against each other as the elevator jerked slightly. It was brief, a fraction of a second, but enough to send a jolt through her. She quickly pulled her hand away, suddenly aware of how much space was between them and how close they were at the same time. It was silly. It was just a touch. And yet, something about it lingered in the air, unspoken. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer now, as though noticing her sudden discomfort. She nodded quickly, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "Yeah, just tired. It's been a long week." She cleared her throat again, attempting to brush off the strange sensation of his proximity. He offered a small, knowing smile, and for a moment, she thought she saw something deeper in his eyes, something like understanding. A flicker of something unspoken passed between them, and she couldn't help but wonder if he was seeing the same thing she was feeling. She shook her head slightly, forcing herself to focus. The elevator lurched again, and for a split second, the lights flickered. Her heart raced, but not because of the unexpected movement. It was the sudden closeness. The way he was standing so near, how she was aware of every shift of his body. She tried to look at her phone again, to regain some sense of normalcy, but it was impossible to ignore the pull she felt. She was too aware of him, his presence too magnetic. She had been in elevators countless times before, but never had she felt like this. Her thoughts started to wander again, back to her marriage, to the lack of spark, to the overwhelming monotony. Her connection with her husband felt so distant now. He was there, physically, but emotionally, it felt like they were oceans apart. "How's your evening looking?" he asked again, breaking her out of her thoughts. She blinked, surprised by the question. "I'm just heading home to my husband," she said automatically. The words felt heavy, though. She hesitated. "It's just been a long day." He raised an eyebrow, a faint, curious smile curling on his lips. "I get it. Sometimes the days feel like they stretch on forever." She didn't respond right away. His comment hit too close to home. She glanced up at him, studying his expression, wondering what kind of man he was. He didn't seem to be offering anything more than casual conversation, but there was something about his tone, the way he held himself, that made her question if this was just small talk. Was it possible to feel an attraction to someone you barely knew, someone you were never supposed to meet? She wondered about the things unsaid between them, the tension in the air, the way his presence seemed to fill up the space. The elevator slowly moved downward, and the soft hum of the machinery was the only sound between them. It should have been an ordinary moment, one that passed without thought. But it wasn't. It was something more. Something undefined, but undeniable. And in that moment, she realized, this fleeting encounter was enough to make her question everything she thought she knew about her life, her marriage, and herself. The elevator hummed as it descended, the soft mechanical sound a stark contrast to the electric tension that now hung in the air. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something subtle but undeniable. His presence was no longer just that of a stranger in passing, it was becoming something more. His gaze, steady and confident, lingered on her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen. Her thoughts flickered back to her husband, to the emptiness that had become their conversations. He had been distant for months now, retreating into his own world, offering little more than tired smiles and brief acknowledgments. She had tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself that the quiet was normal, that their love had simply matured into something more comfortable. But deep down, she knew the truth. They had stopped connecting. And with each passing day, the emotional void between them seemed to widen. The stranger shifted slightly, drawing her back into the moment. The elevator's soft hum continued as time seemed to stretch, and yet, everything felt suspended in that moment. The air between them was thick, and she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The quiet tension was overwhelming, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't want it to end. She wanted to stay in this space where everything was uncertain, where she didn't have to confront the harsh reality of her own life. Her mind raced, torn between the life she had always known and the possibility of something different. Her marriage, once filled with laughter and connection, now felt distant, suffocating. It had been months since she felt anything more than a brief touch or polite words from her husband. The absence of warmth had grown into a silent partner in their relationship, one that neither of them acknowledged, but both knew was there. And here, with this stranger, there was none of that emptiness. There was no pretense, no obligations, just raw, unfiltered connection. Her pulse quickened again as she realized how easily she could step away from everything, even if just for a moment, to experience something new, something real. She glanced at the man beside her, his presence so overwhelming that she almost forgot to breathe. He was still watching her, his eyes intense, as if he was waiting for her to make the next move. His lips quirked upward ever so slightly, a silent challenge. Was he daring her to cross that line, to give in to the temptation they both clearly felt? She swallowed hard, her mind spinning. This wasn't just a moment of innocent flirtation. It was more than that. The tension between them was undeniable, almost magnetic. She could feel it pulling her closer, urging her to let go of her reservations. But the weight of her marriage, of her vows, was heavy on her shoulders. She had always prided herself on her loyalty, on her commitment to her husband. And yet, in this moment, those vows felt like chains, holding her back from experiencing something she hadn't realized she was craving. Something she had buried deep down for so long, beneath the surface of a life that had become predictable, mundane, and unfulfilling. "Are you happy?" His voice broke through the storm of her thoughts, the question cutting straight to the heart of it all. There was no judgment in his tone, just curiosity, and something softer, something almost vulnerable. It startled her, the simplicity of the question, but it also struck a nerve she hadn't expected. She hesitated. The question hung in the air like a weight, one that she knew she had to answer, but she wasn't sure she was ready to confront the truth. She didn't want to admit it. Not to him, not to herself. But she couldn't deny it either. I don't know," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked away, suddenly feeling exposed. It's just everything's become so routine, so ordinary. The stranger didn't say anything for a moment, but she could feel his gaze on her, steady and understanding. He didn't need to speak, his silence was enough. She realized, suddenly, that he wasn't judging her. He wasn't pushing her to make a choice. He was simply offering her the space to be honest. And that, in itself, felt like a relief. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "I don't even know what I'm doing anymore," she continued, almost more to herself than to him. "I feel like I'm just going through the motions, living in a marriage that isn't really alive anymore." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. They weren't what she had planned to say, but they were the truth, the uncomfortable, raw truth she had been trying to avoid. And now, with the stranger standing beside her, offering no judgment, no expectations, it felt like the first time in a long while that she had truly said what was on her mind. He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "It's easy to get lost in that," he said quietly. "To forget what it feels like to really live, to really connect with someone." His words felt like a balm to her soul, soothing the ache that had been growing inside her for so long. She had spent so much time convincing herself that she was okay, that everything was fine, that she didn't need anything more. But now, standing here with him, she realized how deeply she had been longing for something that felt real. The stranger's gaze softened, and he took a step closer. She didn't move away. Instead, she found herself leaning into him, drawn by an invisible force. The space between them was so small now, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. It was a dangerous feeling, one that threatened to consume her, but it also felt right. In some strange way, it felt like the answer to everything she had been searching for. "You don't have to make a decision right now," he said, his voice a low murmur. "But maybe just let yourself feel something again. Something outside of all this." His words lingered in the air, like a whispered invitation. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking in the weight of them. She knew what he was offering. It was something simple, something fleeting. A brief escape from the life she had grown so accustomed to. But in that moment, it felt like everything. And for the first time in a long while, she wondered what it would be like to let go. To step outside of the cage she had built for herself, to take a chance on something unknown. The idea was both terrifying and thrilling. She wasn't sure she was ready, but the temptation was overwhelming. The elevator jolted suddenly, snapping her back to reality. Her eyes flew open, and she realized that time was running out. The moment, this fragile bubble they had created between them, was nearing its end. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and charged. But as the elevator finally reached the ground floor, she felt a sinking feeling in her chest, a deep, familiar regret. For just a moment, she had allowed herself to be free, to feel something she hadn't felt in so long. And now, as the door slid open, she knew she had to face the reality waiting for her outside. The question was, would she ever let herself feel this way again? Or would she walk away, back into the life that had grown so cold, so distant? With a final glance at the stranger, she stepped out of the elevator, unsure of what would come next. She stepped out of the elevator, her legs unsteady, her mind still reeling from the intensity of the last few moments. The soft click of the elevator doors closing behind her was a stark contrast to the chaos inside her mind. She tried to ground herself, to focus on the mundane details of the hallway, the familiar sounds of heels tapping against the floor, the low murmur of voices in the distance. But none of it felt real. Everything felt surreal now, as if the weight,